Let's talk about Snow White. The Snow White movie is in a bit of trouble right now for a lot of reasons. They changed it, and there's so many reasons for this movie to be in trouble. Let's start with the obvious one. The lead actress, is being very smug about how she's saying her things. Whoever gave her talking points, they did a bad job because she's saying everything you would say if you wanted people to boycott your movie, disrespecting the original. And now, let's talk about adapting stories from 100 years ago. Snow White came out in 1937, as I understand, and that's a long time ago. Things are different now. People have different expectations for their movies. I understand that. But you have to, if you want the fan base of the original to love what you're doing now, to love the new thing, you have to at least show respect for the original. I'm not against making alterations. That's what you do with an adaptation. Disney is just not getting it right. They either do a carbon copy, which we criticize them for, because why would I want to watch the same thing again? They've had major success with that, like The Lion King and Little Mermaid. Well, Little Mermaid not so much, but they're basically carbon copies of the originals, so much so that the animators of the original Lion King tried to sue because they basically copied their work. Let's get back. But on the other hand, if they do something original, now everyone's criticizing them for it. And so I don't think it's wrong to have Disney changing up the Snow White story. Hello there, Ginger Monster. Nice to see you. I'm talking about Snow White right now and how changing up the differences in movies can really affect, people and how they perceive your movie. And I want to point out that we've already had 3 Snow White adaptations that are unfaithful to the original. We've had Snow White and the Huntsman, we've had Mirror Mirror, which I haven't seen, and we have Snow White and the Huntsman 2. Or maybe that's a prequel. I haven't seen any of those movies, but basically, we've already had several Snow White adaptations, not from Disney, that are unfaithful to the source material, that make major changes to varying success levels. And so, for me, it seems that people seem to have forgotten that, and so are we really angry that they're changing the source material and changing the plot of the story, or are we angry at the actress trashing the original? And I think that's what's really going on here. It's not wrong I don't have a problem with altering, you're doing an adaptation. I, as a viewer, don't necessarily want to see a carbon copy of the original. If I want to watch the original, I will watch the original. What I do want to see is something adapted that has new things in it, but is still respectful of the source material, that gives me nostalgia, but also takes it to new places. So I have no problem with them changing the plot and adding to it. You kind of have to, because the original is actually not that long. And so you would have to beef up the plot a little bit. And so I don't have a problem with them changing it. I do have a problem with the actress being very, very smug and apparently just disrespecting the heck out of the very first movie that Walt Disney ever made. Why would you do that? That is just a bad PR stunt. Now, let's talk about the dwarves and the different casting of multiple races. People on one hand are saying, this is really bad, I just want the original, and other people are saying, it's not actual diversity because you only cast one short person and the rest of them are tall people. And this is where the whole diversity thing really falls apart when you start doing tokenism, because Disney pushes a lot of diversity. They're very strongly for representation. So on one hand, you say, hey, I am for representation. We're going to cast a Latina woman as Snow White, but we're not going to cast little people and give little people work as dwarves. They only have one. There's a lot of little people who would love to have that role, to play one of the dwarves as Snow White, of all colors. Let's not talk about color for a second. Let's just talk about little people. It's like Disney pays lip service to representation and diversity and all of that stuff. But then when it comes time to casting, they don't cast little people as the dwarves, which to me doesn't make any sense. And I know it can be a bit of an issue for some people thinking that, oh, it's they're not dwarves. Dwarves is guys, a dwarf is a fictional creature. It's from fairy tales. We have them from Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia. These are fantasy creatures, and they're very, very short people. Does it not make sense to just hire short people to play them? You know, we didn't do that in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits, and I understand it's a very nuanced conversation, but I do care about people getting work, and if a little person, you know, wants to get work, I think they should at least have the opportunity to play different characters that would be easier for them to play, such as dwarves. And so I'm not going to get into a whole Peter Dinklage thing. That's for another video. In terms of the color of the people playing the dwarves, honestly, guys, I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, that's what you get when you have open casting. When you're actually colorblind and stuff like that, then you're going to be picking people based on, you know, their talent instead of their color of their skin. And so if you had open casting and you had all of these people that came and you picked them based on their talent, then it makes sense that you would have a diversity of people in the dwarves. And so I'm not necessarily against that. Now, thank you, Ginger Monster, for mentioning this fantasy was based on Norse mythology. And now we get into a very interesting part about the whole adaptation based on the old mythology and adapting it for modern audiences. Because let's just talk about an uncomfortable truth. We can also have this very same discussion with Rings of Power. You know, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's based on, you know, English mythology, and so people may think that that's not very accurate to cast black people. But let's also consider, from a business point of view, this is where we have the clash between art and business. Because if you are going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a property, billions of dollars in the case of Rings of Power, you need to have mass appeal in order to recoup that money. And now I am completely sympathetic and empathetic to the idea that sometimes we just want to see the original story on screen. We want to see the original respected. And I do take big issue with, you know, modern Hollywood's approach to diversity and representation. I'm all for representation and diversity. I want everyone to have stories that they can relate to, but I hate tokenism. Here's what I mean. I am for diversity of stories that we can see. I love having Black Panther because I can see a story about a black man working through his African heritage as a superhero story. I love Shang-Chi because it's an Asian man working through his heritage as a superhero story. And then we have Tony Stark, a white billionaire, working through his emotions. We have Captain America. And then we have all of these diversity of stories and diversity of lead characters to choose from. I don't want to live in a bubble where I only watch a certain thing. And I want to see lots of different stories. And so a diversity of choices of the kinds of stories that I see. I want to understand what black people go through the black community and what Asian people go through. I want to see all of these stories. What I don't want to see is stories being degraded by shoehorning in a bunch of check boxes. It's like, oh, we have to have an Asian character, we have to have a black character, you have to have a woman character, you have to have strong female character, you have to have this kind of man and this kind of guy and this kind of person. When you cram all of those, when you try to check boxes into every single movie, you ruin the ability to do justice to the story that you present those people. For example, The Last Jedi. They should have just spent more time with the new characters that we had. And instead they had to shoehorn in another Asian character. But what happened? Because they shoehorned in all these characters, they weren't able to do justice to, you know, the characters that they had. And in Rise of Skywalker, Rose, the Asian character that a lot of people liked, was just pushed off to the side. So they ended up just disrespecting the communities that they were trying to represent because they were just checking off boxes. When you make checking boxes more important than writing a great story that everyone can resonate with, that's when you really have a problem. That's when people really start to get angry. It's like, why are you pushing all of this stuff down my throat? Especially like people nowadays, they just don't like being preached to. If you're sitting on your high horse and preaching down to people, like they're not gonna like you. And I think that's the big mistake that, you know, the actress of Snow White is making. She seems to be preaching. All right, so the problem is that the actors recruited by the quota play like potatoes. Yeah, unfortunately, and that's true. And sometimes they put the quota ahead of talent. And so real talent can often get overlooked, and thus we, the viewer, get less quality stories. And then it's just a whole mess that makes people really, really angry. Now, I want to emphasize, I see a lot of YouTubers going around saying, Snow White is an absolute disaster. This movie is trash. It's like, guys, you don't know that. You haven't seen it. You don't know if it's trash. It might be, but it might not be. And just because the lead actress is smug and doing very badly at PR doesn't mean that they don't have a very good movie on their hands. Just because they changed it from the original doesn't mean the new alterations won't be good. They might not be. They might be terrible. But they also might be good. We don't know until we watch the movie. And so I'm going to refrain from doing this whole Snow White's a disaster or Disney's panicking. It's like, they might be, I think they're panicking from a PR standpoint because everybody just seems to be turning on this movie because the lead actresses have just done a terrible job, you know, promoting it and being respectful to the fan base. It's like, hey, look, if I am a creator and I'm going to take a beloved source material and make alterations to it, I want to make sure I respect the heck out of the fan base and I'm honest and open with them up front. I'm not going to try to hoodwink them. I'm not going to try to disrespect what they like. You know, I'm going to try to respect the original, but take it to new places and give new ideas so that I'm not just feeding them the same thing that they've already had. I'm taking the good parts and giving them what they want, you know, giving them good nostalgia and fan service, but also taking the story into new, exciting places. That's what an adaptation should do. And I hope that that's what the Snow White movie does, but I don't have high hopes. But we'll have to wait and see. It's just a life experience. I already know that it will be something wrong. Maybe, you know, and you know, and I respect that because when you've been let down, when we've been duped so many times, and like, I understand, you know, being jaded when it comes to the stuff that Disney is going to give us. We've been let down a lot. I get that, but I'm just saying, like, from, you know, I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I don't like to let the jadedness and the bitterness take hold of me. You know, I like to hold out for good things, and so I don't like to jump in on the negativity too fast. But I do think that given Disney's track record, it's highly probable that there will be a lot of things with the Snow White movie that are just not super great. But I'm going to hold out on giving a judgment until I see it because I think that's just the fair way to do it.